"You don't belong in this section. I'm going to need you to move." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. The way Cheryl Dunmore said it, flat, certain, like she was reading a legal notice, made it clear she wasn't asking. The woman in seat 3A didn't respond right away. She was still looking out the window at the tarmac, watching a fuel truck idle near the terminal. Her carry-on was already in the overhead bin. Her boarding pass was in her jacket pocket. She had been sitting there for 4 minutes before the confrontation started. Her name was Dr. Naomi Ellison Bard. She was 53 years old. She was wearing a navy fleece, gray slacks, and a pair of reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She looked, to someone who wasn't paying attention, like a middle school librarian on a budget vacation. She was, in fact, the founding partner of Ellison Bard Medical Group, a surgical practice with 7 locations across Georgia, North Carolina, and Tennessee. She had performed over 4,000 procedures in her career. She had been named to the Atlanta Business Chronicle's list of most influential executives 3 years running. She owned the practice, the building the practice operated from, and 3 investment properties in Buckhead. None of that was visible from where Cheryl Dunmore was standing. "Ma'am." Cheryl stepped closer. Her tone hadn't changed. "This is business class. I'm going to need to see your boarding pass." Naomi turned from the window then. She looked at the flight attendant the way a surgeon looks at a scan, carefully, without expression, reading what's there. "You're welcome to scan it at the gate," Naomi said. "They already did. I'd like to see it myself." The man across the aisle, a heavy-set white gentleman in a pressed button-down, had his boarding pass out and ready. Cheryl had not asked him for it. She had not, in the 7 minutes since boarding began, asked anyone else in this section for anything except their drink preference. Naomi reached into her jacket pocket and held out the boarding pass without standing up. Cheryl took it. Read it, looked at Naomi, looked at the pass again. "This says 3A, yes." A pause. Something shifted in Cheryl's expression. Not an apology, not quite. More like a recalibration. She handed the pass back and moved on without another word. No sorry. No acknowledgement that the entire exchange had been unnecessary, humiliating, and witnessed by 6 other passengers. Naomi put the pass back in her pocket. She picked up the magazine she'd brought and opened it to the page she'd marked. Her hands were steady. They were always steady. 26 years of surgery had made sure of that, but her jaw was tight. It had always been something. Always. A hotel check-in that took twice as long. A valet who assumed she was dropping someone off rather than arriving. A restaurant host who led her past the good tables before she asked for a specific one. Small indignities stacked up over a lifetime, each one light enough on its own, but heavy in aggregate, like sand in a wound. This was not the first time a flight attendant had questioned her right to be somewhere she had paid to be. It would not, she suspected, be the last. The plane filled in around her. A woman with a baby settled into 3C. A man in a suit took 2A and immediately fell asleep. Cheryl and another attendant, a younger woman named Tess, moved through the cabin with the brisk efficiency of people who had done this too many times to count. Tess came to Naomi first. "Can I get you anything before we push back? Water, orange juice, champagne? Water would be great, thank you." Tess smiled and moved on. She was maybe 26, 27. Knew enough that this was still a job she liked. Cheryl came through the same route 20 minutes later with warm towels. She handed one to the man in 2A, now awake. She handed one to the woman in 3C, who thanked her twice. She handed one to the man across the aisle in 3B without being asked. She did not hand one to Naomi. She walked past 3A like the seat was unoccupied, like the woman sitting in it was part of the upholstery, like the earlier confrontation had simply not happened, and therefore no correction was necessary. Naomi watched her go. She did not call out. She did not press the call button. She folded Hessa magazine and set it in her lap and looked out the window at the clouds forming over Hartsfield-Jackson. She thought about a patient she had operated on last spring. 61 years old, retired school principal, had driven himself to the emergency room because he didn't want to worry his wife. He had waited 4 hours in a waiting room with a ruptured appendix because 3 triage nurses in succession had looked at him, a large black man in paint-stained work clothes. and decided his pain level was probably exaggerated. By the time Naomi got to him, she had 40 minutes of room left before things became catastrophic. She had made those 40 minutes count. She thought about that a lot on flights, about the gaps between what people look like and what they are, about all the assumptions that get made in the space between a glance and a decision. The plane leveled out at 35,000 feet. Tess came by with the snack service. Cheryl followed with refills. Tess asked Naomi if she'd like anything else. Naomi asked for a second water and got it inside of 2 minutes. Cheryl refilled the man in 3B without being asked. She did not glance at 3A. It was the specificity of it that was remarkable, not a general inattentiveness. Cheryl was attentive to everyone else in the section, brisk, professional, even warm when she spoke to the woman with the baby. This was a targeted absence, a deliberate nothing directed at one particular seat, one particular passenger, and it had been going on for 90 minutes. Naomi pressed the call button at the 1 hour 40 mark. Not out of desperation. She had a full water bottle and was not especially hungry. She pressed it because she wanted to see what happened when she made it impossible to be overlooked. Tess appeared within 40 seconds. "Everything okay? What can I get you?" "I was hoping for the snack selection," Naomi said. "Of course, I'll bring the basket right over." She did. She also brought a warm cookie wrapped in a small square of parchment that Naomi hadn't asked for and hadn't seen offered to anyone else. "These are from the back," Tess said quietly, with a half-smile that suggested she was aware, on some level, of what had been happening in this section of the plane. Cheryl was at the front galley when this exchange happened. She saw it. She turned back to what she was doing. When the pilot announced their initial descent into Charlotte Douglas, Naomi folded her tray table and put her magazine away. She was calm. She was always calm. It was a professional habit that had become a personal one, so thoroughly integrated into who she was that she sometimes had to remind herself, in private, that being calm did not mean not feeling things. She was feeling things. She was feeling 47 years of being too often the only one in the room who looked like her. She was feeling the accumulated weight of every professional interaction where she'd had to prove something before being taken seriously. She was feeling a specific crystalline anger about the warm towel that had been handed to 5 people and withheld from 1. And she was feeling something else, too. Something quieter. She was thinking about the conference. The reason she was on this flight was a private medical leadership summit in Charlotte. 2 days, 23 attendees, invitation only. Naomi had been asked to keynote. The summit was hosted by the Meridian Health Initiative, a nonprofit that directed over $60 million annually toward hospital partnerships, rural care expansion, and research grants across the Southeast. The airline this flight operated under, Vista Horizons Regional, had just submitted a formal proposal to become the exclusive medical transport partner for Meridian's network. The proposal was on the desk of a review committee. Naomi sat on that committee. She had not made up her mind yet. The proposal had some merit. The pricing was competitive. The route coverage was genuinely impressive for a regional carrier. She picked up her magazine again for the last few minutes of descent. The cover story was about the future of sustainable aviation. She read 3 paragraphs and didn't absorb any of them. She was thinking about the warm towel. She was thinking about 47 minutes of being treated like she was not there. She was thinking about a man in a waiting room with a ruptured appendix. The wheels touched down at 4:17 p.m. The seatbelt sign chimed off. People stood and opened overheads and began the slow press toward the exit. Naomi waited. She always waited. She'd learned years ago that fighting to be first off a plane saved about 90 seconds and cost considerably more in aggravation. Cheryl stood at the forward exit door, thanking passengers as they deplaned. Her voice had the warmth of a corporate recording. "Thank you for flying Vista. Enjoy Charlotte. Have a great evening." When Naomi reached the door, Cheryl met her eyes for exactly half a second. "Thank you for flying Vista Horizons." Naomi paused. "I'll be sure to pass along my feedback," she said, and then she walked off the plane and into the terminal. She did not say it as a threat. She did not say it with heat. She said it the way she said everything, precisely, and without waste. But something in Cheryl's expression shifted. Just slightly. The way a person's face moves when a door they thought was closed turns out to be open, and they realize too late they've been talking too loudly on the other side of it. The summit was held at a converted mill property outside Charlotte, now an event center with exposed brick and very good acoustics. 23 people gathered around a horseshoe of tables. Naomi spoke on the second morning, 28 minutes, no slides. She talked about care gaps in rural communities, about the compounding effects of delayed diagnosis, about what it actually costs, in money, in lives, when systemic assumptions go unchallenged. The room was very quiet. Afterward, a man named Gideon Marsh, who ran the Meridian Initiative, shook her hand and said it was the most honest keynote they'd had in 6 years. On the third morning, the committee met. Naomi was not the only voice. There were 4 other reviewers: a hospital administrator from Raleigh, a health policy researcher from Emory, a retired federal health official, and a logistics consultant who had evaluated the route maps. They spent the first 90 minutes on the financials, the routes, the service record, the compliance history. Then they spent 30 minutes on qualitative factors, culture, accountability, evidence of how the company treated its stakeholders, not just in policy documents, but in practice. Naomi waited until the other 4 had spoken. Then she told them what had happened on Flight 2241 from Atlanta to Charlotte. She told it the way she told everything, without drama, in sequence with specific detail. The initial challenge at boarding, the 47 minutes without service, the warm towels distributed to every passenger in the section except one, the call button, Tess and the cookie, the departure door. She did not editorialize. She did not say what it meant. She laid the facts down like instruments on a surgical tray and let the other 4 people in the room draw their own conclusions. The room was very quiet again. The logistics consultant asked a single question. Was this an isolated incident or a pattern? Naomi said she couldn't speak to pattern from a single flight, but she noted that incidents that are not isolated tend not to feel like isolated incidents when you're in the middle of them. And she noted that the response at the door, or rather the absence of any response, any acknowledgement, any indication that the attendant was aware she'd done something that warranted acknowledgement, was, in her clinical experience, more revealing than the incident itself. Patterns don't announce themselves. They show up in the small moments when no one is watching, when someone thinks the stakes are low, when someone doesn't know who they're talking to, or when they do know and have decided it doesn't matter. The vote was taken 2 hours later. It was 3-2 against recommending Vista Horizons for the partnership. Naomi's was one of the 3. The official communication went out that afternoon, a formal letter to Vista Horizons executive leadership informing them that the Meridian Health Initiative would not be moving forward with the proposed partnership at this time. $62 million in contracted medical transport services over a 5-year term would be directed elsewhere. The letter cited a number of factors. It was professional. It was measured. It did not mention Flight 2241. It did not mention Seat 3A. It did not mention warm towels. 3 days later, Naomi was back in Atlanta. She had a 7:30 surgical slot and got to the hospital at 6, same as always. She changed, reviewed the pre-op notes, spoke to the anesthesiologist, and scrubbed in. The surgery took 2 hours and 12 minutes. It went exactly as planned. Afterward, in the attending lounge, she poured herself a cup of coffee and sat by the window. The city was doing what it always did in the early morning, waking up slowly, filling in, becoming itself. She thought about what a colleague had once said to her back when she was a resident and exhausted and wondering if any of it was worth what it cost. Her mentor, a woman named Dr. Frances Osi-Egumang, who had retired to Savannah and kept a garden and a correspondence with half the cardiothoracic surgeons in the country, had told her something that Naomi had never forgotten. She had said, "The work you do reflects who you are, every time, in every anyone's watching or not, and the world, slowly, imperfectly, with considerable delay, tends to figure that out." Naomi drank her coffee. The city came fully into light outside the window. She had 3 more patients that afternoon. She picked up the chart on the first one and started reading. She didn't know exactly what had happened inside Vista Horizons after the Meridian letter arrived. She didn't follow up. It wasn't her job to follow up, but she heard, through the kind of industry grapevine that operates in every specialized field, a mention at a conference, a comment from a colleague who sat on another board, that there had been a response, that the response had been significant, that Cheryl Dunmore was no longer employed by Vista Horizons Regional, and that the leadership team had, for the first time in the company's 11-year history, brought in an outside firm to conduct a full review of cabin crew conduct and complaint procedures, not because they were required to, because $62 million is a very clear signal, even to people who are not accustomed to paying attention. Naomi heard this and did not feel triumphant. She wasn't built for triumph in the ordinary sense. What she felt was something more like the quiet satisfaction of watching a mechanism work the way it was supposed to, of seeing that actions, in fact, have consequences, that the ledger, eventually, comes due. She thought about the man in the waiting room again. She thought about what it means to be dismissed, to be invisible in a room where you are paying to be present, to have someone look past you not because they don't see you, but because they've decided, without asking, without knowing, that you don't matter enough to see. She thought about how that feeling compounds over a lifetime, how it accumulates, how it costs people things they can never fully account for, opportunities missed, energy spent proving what should never need proving, time lost to 1,000 small battles that shouldn't have been battles at all. She was not a woman who made speeches. She didn't give interviews about her personal experiences or write op-eds or tell her story at panels unless the story was directly relevant to a clinical point she was trying to make. She believed in the work. She believed in doing the work well, every day, in every room, and letting that be the argument. But she also believed, and had believed this since she was 7 years old, and a school librarian in Augusta had looked at her twice before handing over the book she'd asked for, as though verifying she was allowed to want it, that being treated with dignity was not a reward. It was not something you earned by revealing your credentials, or your address, or your bank balance. It was something owed at the door, before you said a word, before anyone knew anything about you at all, and when it was withheld, deliberately, repeatedly, in plain sight, the people who withheld it told you something important about themselves. They told you they had confused their uniform for their worth. They had confused their temporary authority over a small space for an enduring authority over who mattered and who didn't. They had looked at a woman in a navy fleece and reading glasses and made a decision that cost their company $62 million. And the extraordinary part, the part that Naomi found herself returning to in the quiet early mornings before surgery, with her coffee and the city coming into the light, was that they had done all of that without knowing, without intending the specific consequence. They had simply operated on an assumption so embedded, so automatic, that they didn't even register it as a choice. That was the thing about assumptions. They don't announce themselves. They show up in the small moments. In who gets the warm towel and who doesn't. In who you stop at the door and who you wave through. In the half-second look you give someone before deciding how much of your attention they deserve. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the person on the receiving end of that half-second look is sitting on the committee that decides your company's future. Sometimes the world, slowly and imperfectly, with considerable delay, figures it out.